Hi, welcome to the California CEDAR sponsored Communities of Practice series. CEDAR, which stands for Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform, is a national center based at the University of Florida and has a mission to support students with disabilities in achieving college and career-ready standards. For those wanting to know more, please visit CEDAR.org. That's CEEDAR.org. This webinar series aims to share information that supports educator preparation programs in redesign efforts grounded in inclusive practice. The topics include teacher performance assessment, preparation and requirements, traumatic brain injury, extensive support needs and inclusion, and dyslexia. And we have more topics coming soon. We hope you find the information and resources helpful.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Amy Hanreddy, and I am the chair of a special education department at California State University, Northridge, and also a member of the CEDAR California statewide team. And we will, in a few minutes, talk about what CEDAR is, because some of you may not be familiar. And I'll kick it over to Annie to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Annie Spillane. I am at UMass Global, and I am the chair of the special ed department there, and happy to be here with all you guys and have everyone chatting with us.
Anna D.
Anna D.
Who are you?
Hello, welcome everybody. I have served two roles. I am a classroom special education teacher. I work at a full inclusion charter school in Los Angeles. And I also work at Cal State University Northridge as a part-time faculty in the special education department.
Yes.
Excited to be with all of you today.
Yes. So just to help us understand kind of where everyone is coming from, it would be super helpful if you could just in the chat, let us know what your role is and where you're from. If you're from a university or a school district or a county office, if you want to just include that there, then that helps us to have some context. Okay, so while you're doing that, while you're kind of adding who you are, we're going to move on. So I think, this is a 1 hour session and we will have opportunities to talk, but just for now, if you want to make sure you're already doing it, just stay muted so we don't have the background noise. Please use the chat. If you want to add something, just use the raise hand feature so we make sure we see you. That's all. Yeah, that's good. Here's our plan for today so that you kind of know where we're headed. Our focus is on the new literacy TPEs, and we're really focusing on how those connect to our preparation of teachers to serve students with higher support needs. And we will kind of use that term higher support needs sometimes interchangeably with extensive support needs. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about who we're talking about when we're talking about those students. But we'll start with kind of just the context of what those literacy TPEs are, and then we'll go from there. We're going to emphasize TPEs in 3 different areas. So one is focused on adapting literacy instruction. One's focusing on providing supplemental literacy instruction. And the third is focused on providing literacy instruction to AAC users, or augmentative and alternative communication users. And there is a little bit of overlap between those TPEs, and we'll definitely talk about that too. As we mentioned, so we are not from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. We are here as colleagues and are here to support this community of practice. And so the first half of our session is a little bit more focused on us providing context and just kind of giving us a jumping off point for some examples of what we're working on in our own programs. And we will be sharing our challenges also and kind of what we're still struggling with as we move forward with implementing these TPEs. And then again, it's called a community of practice. And so after we do that context, we're going to break into some smaller groups and have some facilitated discussion around each of those 3 areas. So we'll kind of rotate through talking about those 3 different areas of emphasis within the literacy TPEs. That'll be a chance for you to kind of share with one another what's working, but also just like us, sharing challenges and maybe some opportunities for support or ideas for one another as well. So that's why we're recording the first half so that we can share out kind of the context part, but the general discussion part will not be recorded so that everybody feels safe and comfortable. And there is not somebody here from CTC who's here to police us and catch us in those challenges and take away our accreditation. Nothing like that. This is really just about problem solving. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just what CEDAR is, it's an acronym that not everybody is familiar with. So CEDAR stands for the Collaboration for Effective Education Development, Accountability, and Reform. It's a national technical assistance center. It's based at the University of Florida, and it supports states to align systems in support of students who struggle in schools with an emphasis on students with disabilities. And so we are part of I think you can go to the next slide. So we are part of a statewide work group. So because it's a national technical assistance center, you can see CEDAR is working in quite a few states, all of those that are blue on the map. And so we do have a statewide group of mostly faculty and teacher preparation programs across public, private, CSU, kind of a really big mix, and really focus on alignment of systems and supports. And we do have, as part of that statewide group, membership and representation from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So it really helps us to make sure we're very clear on what's coming down for our programs. And you can see that the aspiration from CEDAR that overrides everything is the focus that every student with a disability has an equitable opportunity to achieve. So, okay, here we go into a little bit of the context part. Many of you might be coming in, and this might be very familiar, that starting in fall 2022, there were some significant changes to the mild to moderate and what is now called extensive support needs credentials through the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. So whereas previously, and I'm just going to focus on the mild to moderate part for a minute, but previously those with a mild to moderate special education credential were authorized to serve students with specific eligibilities. That has really expanded quite a bit under the new authorization. So you can see in the yellow box that folks with even just a mild to moderate special support needs credential are now authorized to serve a very wide range of students. And I think that as we dig into the literacy TPEs, that's really reflected in the literacy TPEs in terms of what folks with the mild to moderate support needs credential are expected to know and be able to do as teachers in their programs or their classrooms. We can go to the next slide. So this is just kind of background on those literacy TPEs. So we had Senate Bill 488 that did require the updating of those literacy and reading standards for the preparation of teachers. So when I say that the TPEs, those are those teacher performance expectations, and that required that the commission review programs and ensure that we are providing that updated instruction related to literacy. And as I think probably, again, many or all of you may know that this is also being embedded in our teacher performance assessment, whether you're doing Cal TPA or Ed TPA or the Fresno, the Fresno special one. It's going to be now, literacy is going to be embedded in that. And so then we're going to not be having the RECA anymore. And so then there is a website that CTC has, and that's there in the slides, that has kind of all of that information about the new TPEs and the process for certification and what needs to happen is all on that website. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so what you see on the screen, so we're kind of drilling down to where we're going to focus in today. So you can see those special education literacy TPEs, just starting with 7.1 to 7.5 are the same between those in the mild to moderate support needs program and extensive support needs program. So you see they both have both MMSN and EX there. And so that is really where we're going to focus. And those that are the darker yellow are the ones that are really kind of the focus here today. And we really wanted to focus on those because whether our programs are focused on mild, moderate support needs or extensive support needs doesn't really matter at this point, because for these literacy TPEs, we're really focusing on that full range of students that we're supporting. So we're going to take each of those kind of piece by piece. The next slide just there's an additional 2 that are focused specifically on students with extensive support needs. So because they're not part of that overlap, I wanted to make sure that you know that they're there, but we're not going to make those our focus today. Annie, you're muted.
Sorry, I've been coughing, so I muted myself. So we're going to start with talking about these different TPEs and kind of what they are. And then also we're going to talk a little bit individually what we are doing before we kind of move you into groups where we can really talk with everybody what they're doing and how it's going and what all our challenges are. So to kind of start with, I just wanted to talk about when we're talking about literacy, what do we kind of mean here? So we all have kind of that common framework to work with. So literacy, we're looking at as a representation of language in symbolic form, either concrete, and when we talk about concrete, we mean objects and pictures, or abstract, where we're talking about letters and words, right? And then how we can help individuals with disabilities as needed, move from those concrete to those abstract forms and representations of literacy. When we talk about literacy activities, we're talking about reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And I highlighted that listening and speaking because I think it's really important to look at communication as being an important and foundational part of literacy. Too often we just think of it as reading and writing and phonics and decoding. And while that's there and is true and important, it's not just that. And we really want to widen our view of literacy, especially as we're working with students with higher support needs. It encompasses both skill-based and meaning-based strategies for instruction. So not just that decoding phonics, but also how we're helping individuals understand their world and understand the context of the literacy they're engaging with. I imagine that most of you know all this already, but since this one talks about necessary accommodations and modifications, when we talk about accommodations, we're generally talking about access to learning and content, whereas modifications change content or learning requirements. And we use both of those to allow individuals to access grade level literacy activities. And it's really important that we really look at that part where we're talking about grade level literacy activities for students, regardless of where they are chronologically or developmentally. Some of the resources, and you'll be getting this this PowerPoint with all these links that you might find helpful in terms of helping you to access and share with your students. The Tar Heel Reader, which actually allows you to make all kinds of books and text accessible. There's the CDAR Innovation Configuration on Literacy. It's got some wonderful information in there. And then there's a couple of blogs, which has information on accommodations, modifications, and adaptations. And understood.com is a source I've always found to be really helpful and interactive as a way to provide information. So at UMass Global, how are we addressing it? One of the things we're doing is we're looking at literacy instruction being addressed across the courses in our program. So we have some early intensive literacy courses, but we're continually incorporating literacy across the courses. We use a lot of case studies to address the range of learners and needs as a way to make sure that our candidates are really getting practice with that wide range that you saw on that first slide, right? On one of those early slides that mild, moderate support needs teachers and extensive support needs teachers need to cover. And then that application is done via early fieldwork assignments and clinical practice. So here you can see one of our signature assignments where they use a case study to actually create a lesson plan that involves adaptations for providing literacy to a very wide range of learners and disabilities in the case study classroom. And you can kind of see it's pretty intense, some of those students. So that's kind of a challenge that I'm finding is we're trying to make sure that we're covering all those bases. Our case studies are getting really complex, right? Like some of these classes are like, wow. It helps our candidates meet and see everything, but sometimes it feels like, are we really going to see that in a classroom? And how much are we making this more complex than it needs to be? And then the other problem that we're really struggling with is the opportunities to practice in the field are really limited. All our candidates may not have the same opportunities to engage with the full range of students and actually practice this. So I'm going to send it now to Amy and talk about.
Yep. Awesome. So, so I'm going to talk just for a few minutes on the TPE 7.3, which is focused on providing day-to-day supplemental instruction and or intensive instruction in literacy. So now as we are at CSUN kind of working on how we interpret what does this TPE mean, right? What does it look like? We really interpret this to be focused on raising expectations for high access to literacy instruction for students with extensive support needs. So, so as we look at applying it, I think that we have a strong history of applying intensive literacy instruction in our mild to moderate support needs areas, but haven't done as well in terms of those students with higher support needs and really embedding systematic and literacy instruction for those students. So we also interpret this TPE to focus on what are the unique needs of students with more extensive support needs when we think about supplemental or intensive literacy instruction. And for us, we really focus on really the importance of context and considering generalization for these students as a more unique need. And so that's a really big part of how we're addressing this TPE. So thus we focus on this idea of embedded literacy instruction within typical routines and activities, as opposed to being seen as something that is unique and separate. And so we also see the need to embed current research focused on conventional literacy skills for students who don't use verbal speech. And there is incredible emerging research in this area, but we think that historically, maybe it has not been systematically addressed in our programs. On the right, you can see a couple resources. So one, Adi will talk a little bit more about, but we have adopted a textbook called Comprehensive Literacy for All. Karen Erickson and David Koppenhauer are amazing leaders in this field, especially related to that number 4 bullet there on access to literacy for students who don't use verbal speech. And then some other great resources for us are the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. And then the other one is, I believe it's University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or I might have them reversed, is just literacy instruction for students with significant disabilities. Both of those have links to like practical activities that teacher candidates can use with their own students. You can go to the next slide. And then kind of what are we doing at CSUN to address some of these? So one is as we think about that idea of embedded and systematic literacy instruction, one thing that we do is really focus with our candidates on tools that they can use to embed that instruction in a systematic way throughout a student's school day. So kind of like a basic go-to tool that we use is, we call it the goal activity matrix. Sometimes we call it a game plan for goal activity matrix educational plan. But it's literally just a matrix of the student's goals. And here we're focusing on a literacy goal for a student with more extensive support needs. And then how do we focus on embedding that within all of the kind of general routines in that student's day? And so that really helps them to understand their role as a special education teacher in developing an overall literacy program for the students that they are supporting throughout the day. We also have created, as part of our new program, we did create a new course, which Adi will talk about because she's an instructor for that course, focused on emergent literacy and language development. And then we also just did an analysis of all of our current classes that address literacy skills and really made sure that there was this expanded emphasis to include students with extensive support needs within the examples and the application. So they were really looking at that broad range of learners as they're learning about literacy skills in general. I think that, you're going to see a lot of overlap in our challenges. I think as we focus on expanding the breadth of our program, I think that one of our challenges is ensuring adequate depth to make sure that our candidates are fully prepared to teach all of the kids that they might have assigned to them on a given caseload. And so time is a big factor. We only have a limited number of classes and time with our candidates, and how do we kind of make sure that they are fully prepared and have that depth of skills as well as breadth. And then kind of along with what Annie shared earlier is the opportunities to directly support students with extensive support needs in the area of literacy is sometimes a challenge in our clinical practice. And then especially for interns, if you think of high school, mild, moderate math instructor, we have to think about how are we ensuring that they get adequate practice in explicit literacy instruction for students with extensive needs. And that's a challenge. I'll kick it to Adi.
All right, so I'm going to chat with you for a little bit about the TPE 7.5 and how we've addressed that at CSUN. So we start by working with all of our teacher candidates on understanding the range of AAC options, how we're going to augment our students' communication and access. And that might be for a student who's non-speaking, or it might be for a student who has limited verbal speech, and looking at very low tech paper options all the way to high and fancy tech. And making sure that they understand that all of those are valid and helpful communication tools that allow students access to say what they need to say in a social context or academic context. We start with AAC as access as being a social justice issue for a lot of the students in our program. They're saying, there's a student in my class placement that has a need to augment their communication and they don't have anything. What are we supposed to do? So that first step in making sure that we can teach them all of these literacy and communication skills is that they need to have the tools to do it. And that it's not a matter of having a fancy iPad or other piece of technology. It's a social justice issue, having access to communicate with the people around you. And making sure that those communication systems are robust and have opportunity for joke telling and being silly and saying bad words, and also have access to have all of the academic vocabulary that students are around them are using. So like Amy said, that textbook has been very helpful. It's a very practical tool. We really work with the students in our program on understanding that there are different phases of literacy development and phases of communication development that all human beings go through. And understanding what categorizes an individual as being in one of those different stages and how we push them to the next stage, and what that looks like for students who use traditional verbal communication and for students who don't, and how we can authentically represent all of those different stages and make sure that they have a strong basis in literacy learning, regardless of how they communicate. Another tool that's really helpful is my cough drop. It's linked right there on the website, and you can see some of the students in my class using that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you needed.
It is an interactive website for free that has a lot of different layouts for high-tech AAC, and it's an opportunity for students to just click around and see what it's like. It's very hard to instruct someone in how to use AAC when you've never actually interacted with it yourself. So you can see the students in my class working on some high-tech and some low-tech options, and really we create space in this new class, Emergent Literacy and Language Development, for them to play with the AAC tools. And so they have just an understanding of buttons versus folders and how you move between different parts of the device, and how you could phrase things if you're stuck and you can't find that one particular word, all of that, so that they are able to guide students through that as well. And we work with the students to have this critical consumer sense as they're looking at different published curricula for students who use alternate communication devices versus access to the general education novels and texts that their peers are using, and how to evaluate what is the best tool for my student based on what's research-based practices, what my district is offering as a tool, what my student's family is advocating for, and piecing all of that together. Like Amy and Annie have both said, a struggle that we have is some of our teacher candidates are just not in settings where they're interacting with kids who use AAC devices. So they just don't get that hands-on practice to the extent that we would love them to have to go into the field feeling really confident in it.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to turn off the recording in just a second. And I'm going to, excuse me, put people into breakout rooms. So some of you are going to be in breakout group 1, some of you are going to be in breakout group 2, and some of you are going to stay here with me in the main room. And then this is the time for us to share and really talk about what you're doing and the questions you have and what you're struggling with, so that you can really, we can really share and have this community of practice. So I'm going to turn off the recording right now, or I'm going to pause it at least.